In this tutorial, you're going to learn how to set up and use input and output buses in Cubase. These allow you to make creative and efficient use of the physical inputs and outputs of your audio hardware or sound card. They can appear as different connections within the music software. For example, two mono inputs can appear as two separate mono microphone inputs, for example, mono input A and mono input B, or they can work together as a stereo input on a stereo track. These settings can all be made through the VST Connections window. This can be accessed by going to the Devices menu and selecting VST Connections. Alternatively, you can click on F4 on the computer keyboard. This will open this window here. If you're working with Cubase 4, you'll have 6 different tabs: Inputs, Outputs, Group Effects, External Instruments, and Studio. If you're working with Cubase Studio 4, you'll have a lesser number of these tabs. Let's begin by clicking on the Inputs tab and looking at what's already set up. Cubase will always try and configure itself to have at least one input and output. This will ensure that we can always hear what is recorded in the software. In the inputs at the moment, we have one stereo input, stereo in, and this is configured to work with my audio hardware, which is an M-Audio Firewire, and the device port is a Project Mix input 1 and input 2. These are the physical inputs or jack connections on my audio hardware from which I will gain my signal. If I want to create another input, say a second stereo input, I'm going to click on Add Bus, choose the configuration, in this case as stereo. How many would I like? In this case 1, and then click OK. Cubase now creates a second stereo input bus, labelled stereo input 2, using the same audio device, and will allocate the next available physical inputs on my audio hardware. In this case, Project Mixed Analog input 3 and 4. Let's now say I want to add 2 more mono buses to make use of physical inputs 1 and 2 on my audio hardware, so that I can use these with microphones. We'll click on Add Bus, choose mono as a configuration, set the count as 2, and click OK. Now I have 2 mono ins, mono in, and mono in 2. Cubase will automatically assign the next available physical inputs to the device ports. I can now change this to physical input 1 and physical input 2. I can also rename this by double-clicking here, and let's call this mic input 1, and let's call this one mic 2. That's now set up with 4 separate physical inputs in Cubase, 2 stereo and 2 mono ones. You'll also notice that the physical inputs analog 1 and 2 are working together as one stereo input, and they're working independently of each other as 2 mono inputs for mic 1 and mic 2. If we now click on the Output tab, we can see that Cubase has defaulted to set up a main stereo out working with the Project Mix Analog Out 1 and 2. If I wanted to set up a second output, I can do that by clicking Add Bus, set the configuration to stereo, and click OK. You'll now notice I have stereo output 2, and this will have assigned the next available outputs, in this case 3 and 4. If you're working with Cubase 4, you should click on the Studio tab and make sure that your Monitor 1 bus is set up to play back on your main stereo outputs, in this case Project Mix 1 and 2. If you don't do this, you may find that when you click on loops or samples to preview them on the project window using either the Audition tool or the Scrub tool, you won't actually hear them play back. Once we've done this, we can close the VST Connections window. We can now see those particular connections in the context of individual tracks on a project. Within this project, I have 2 stereo tracks and 2 mono tracks. Let's now start with stereo 1, and in the track inspector, select stereo input. If we now select track 2, stereo 2, we can set this up to record from stereo input 2, mono input 1 track, set this up to record from microphone input 1, and finally mono 2, set this up to take its signal from microphone input 2. I've now pre-configured all 4 of these tracks to take their signal from a discrete input bus within Cubase. As a final check, if we open up the Cubase mixer, we'll be able to see 4 input channels that we've created: stereo input 1, stereo input 2, mic 1, and mic 2. Remember that the hide input channel button allows us to hide or view these. If we look at the extended mixer to see the routing, as a final check, we can look at the inputs on each of the 4 tracks that we've created and make sure that they're set up to stereo in, stereo 2, mic 1 and mic 2 respectively. These are VST connections and setting up input and output buses to make the most efficient use of the physical inputs and outputs on your audio hardware or sound card. Remember that once you've set these up, you can save them within a Cubase template and they can be recalled every time you use that template within Cubase. It's worth investing some time to understand this concept and to set up some input and output buses to suit your way of working and to make the most creative and effective use of Cubase.